Hi, I'm Kerry Deignan Roy, and I am a documentary producer. I've been in this business for 25 plus, maybe even 30 years at this point. I hate to admit that. I'm going to talk today a little bit about the work that I've done through my company, Exhibit A Pictures, which I partner with Alexander Philippe and Robert Muratori. We're going to talk a little bit later with Alexander uh, about the director-producer relationship and how we make that work and things that have worked for us and challenges that we've worked through so that hopefully you can learn some best practices from that. But first, I'm going to start by talking about the role of the producer in nonfiction documentary filmmaking. Then I'd like to talk a little bit about the best practices that I've learned and I've developed and that I use throughout our process to get us from the development process all the way through delivery. So I'm going to focus more heavily on the start and show you how those documents and those processes help support the rest of the process. And then we'll bring in Alexander and we'll talk a little bit more about that relationship. So first I want to talk about, there's an organization that I just joined called the Documentary Producers Alliance. It's an international group. You can look it up online. And I can provide that information later so that the Fantastic Film School can provide that if appropriate. But the reason that this group was formed was because they wanted to set the standards for an inclusive, sustainable, and equitable business practice that producers can follow and maybe amplify some voices of the producers and educate the industry overall about what the producer's role is. So I'm taking some of the things that we've learned and we worked on in that group to talk to you a little bit about that today. One of the things that brought me to this group in particular was a statement that they put out into the world about crediting. There are so many different things for which producers are responsible on a film. And with the different budget levels, the larger films, there are so many different types of producer roles and credits that vary. And I think that overall, between that and the different types of funding opportunities, I guess, that have happened throughout the past few years, we have all the different Kickstarters and crowdsourcing campaign type fundraising sources. The combination of all of the different rules and all of the different ways that people want to try to credit people that have participated, whether it's in a financial way or some other type of support, has created a lot of confusion. So what tends to happen is that those types of producer roles or credits sometimes are diminished or just given away because no one really knows how to categorize the support that someone has given, and they think immediately, oh, that's a producer role, let's give that credit. So the reason I'm giving you that background is because it talks a little bit about why that particular group was formed and what drew me to that group and what I'm going to share with you today. So let's talk a little bit about that. There, associate producer, co-producer, producers, co-executive producer, executive producer, in association with, presented by, a production of. These are all different types of producer credits that are thrown into films, usually in the opening credits, if there are opening credits. So there's a lot of inconsistency in what that means. I think what's important to understand at first, that the financial credits for producers should be or are recommended to be co-production credits in association with, or executive producer type credits. So when you see those usually mean there was some type of financial support. And those credits shouldn't be assigned to someone that has done, producing work that we're going to get to here in a minute. So the producer credit should really be reserved for someone who is hands-on throughout the whole process of the film, not just, a certain section. But what does that even mean, right? So if you Google the definition of a producer, and I encourage you to do this because it's, it's funny. Most of the time, the role of the producer is defined as somebody on a film who is tied to administrative and financial management. And that's true. Those are both very true, but that's so vague and there's so much more. So I'd like to read a little bit of a definition here about what a producer does. Let me open this up. So the producer works side by side with the director to realize their artistic vision and overall goals of the film, ensuring that the production is funded and appropriately staffed, completed on time, within budget, and according to the legal and technical standards required by its distribution. So again, very broad, but if you really listen to that, you'll understand that from the very first nugget of an idea or concept to the time when you deliver the film and your distributor says, okay, it's been accepted, we're writing you a check now, the producer is involved in every single stage from start to finish, from inception to delivery, and touches every single department throughout the film. So you really have to be in it. Like your hands are in it from start to finish. And that is what a producer is. So let's talk a little bit about some of the additional types of producer credits that on a large budget film, all of these responsibilities are divvied up and divvied out. So there's a lead producer or a group of lead producers that manage these different levels and types of producers, such as a co-producer, who is usually there as direct support to a producer. They will take on similar responsibilities, but at the direction of the lead producers, who might say, okay, this is our challenge today. We're trying to figure out how to deal with this particular legal document or this particular shoot. And here's an example. Our partner, Robert Muratori, will take on a co-producer role often for us when we have to do an international shoot, for example. So with Exhibit A Pictures, we have done 7852. We have done Memory, The Origins of Alien, and Leap of Faith, which is William Friedkin on The Exorcist. And for Memory, it was required that we did some international shooting. We had to go on location in Greece and in Volterra in Italy. And because Robert is our cinematographer and Alexander is our director, and it's expensive to ship everybody over there, usually the two of them go and we will pick up local crew. Now, when we're doing that, Robert will take on a lot of the co-production or co-producing responsibilities, dealing with the local site, the local vendors. He works with all the paperwork to get our equipment overseas. And that is really an excellent description, I think, of what a co-producer is on a project, because they really do a lot of the same things you'd be doing yourself, but taking that on under your direction of the overall project. So co-producer. An associate producer is usually a producer that provides some type of support in production, in research, maybe helps with clearances. Then there's the archival producer. That is a really important role in nonfiction filmmaking. A lot of what we do involves working with different types of materials, clearances, photos, old film clips, old historical clips of historical events. So the archival producer has to do a lot of the research to track down where those materials might be. They have to worry about how to acquire those materials and what the licensing aspects of those materials would be. And there's many different levels. Some of them might be in public domain. Some of them might require licensing. Some of them might just require a release, someone's permission to use it, for free. And some of them might go under fair use review, which is a whole nother level and a whole nother lecture for another day, but it's a very specific way to use footage for the purposes of critique or to illustrate a point that you're trying to make, especially in a documentary. The next type of producer is a line producer. The line producer deals with a lot of the operational tasks like budgets, schedules, contracts, post-production supervisor. Post-production supervisor is probably the only producer title that actually clearly defines what they do. The post-production supervisor supervises post-production. They keep that schedule on task. They make sure the budget is appropriately followed and is working in line with the line producers and the producer. It really works to help support the deliverables process, which we'll talk about in a little bit because there are a lot of technical deliveries. So it's good for the post-production supervisor to understand that process and the technical deliveries that go along with delivery. On larger productions, there are additional roles like production coordinators, for example, that might help sort out and plan different location or shoot scheduling, that type of thing. So that's what a coordinator would do. So on all of our films, on occasion, we've brought in one or two of these supporting roles. For the most part, those are all the hats that I wear. So I take that on from start to finish, all of the things we just described. So I want to talk to you a little bit how you can do that, because when you're working with a smaller team like we are, which is, we're a small, mighty team, we get a lot done and we're very efficient. And the way that we do that is through organization, which is a lot of the record keeping that I'm about to discuss with you. Management, which means managing both the task list, everything that has to be completed, but also personalities and crew and people, and making sure that we all work together well and are doing what we need to move the process from one step to the other together. And the last important skill that I think is important is the problem-solving skill. It's about flexibility, and it's about understanding that no matter how many times you make a good plan, it's going to change. Something is going to change. So you have to be able to look ahead, and you'll have your plan A, and we joke about plan B, C, D, E, F. Who knows how far down the alphabet it goes, but be prepared for flexibility. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the different phases of production, because I keep saying from start to finish, that's what a producer does. So let's start at the start and see what that means. The development stage, I would like to emphasize as it's really the foundation. I hope that by the time we get to the end of this lecture, I will have properly illustrated just how important the detail work you do at this stage is. The work you do up front is really going to translate to the success of the film and the ease of delivery at the end. So, very first thing that happens on a film, right, is the concept. Usually that starts with the discussion with the director. And this is the most important discussion that you're going to have, because it's really going to line up all of the other details. You're going to find out what the concept is, what the approach is. You're going to talk about all of the details that are going to affect every single piece of the film. Here's an example. When we did 7852, which was a documentary about the shower scene from Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, we decided that the creative approach was going to be, and this was Alexander's concept, that the interview subjects that we interviewed were going to be trapped, if you will, in the Bates Motel. We wanted to give it that feeling, that claustrophobic feeling of being in that old hotel room and being there. Now, what are we going to do with that? We have all kinds of different interviews that we have to cover. And we're, we don't have a Bates Motel location that we can bring them all to. So we filmed them all on green screen. And we did very, very specific measurements so that the chair that we used, that we brought to every studio, was in the exact same spot. We knew exactly how the lights were measured. We made sure that we thought ahead and set up for those particular shoots so that we could insert those interviews that were shot on green screen into a set that we built. So we had a set designer, we built the set, we made, the wallpaper look like the hotel. We had the, hotel furniture, and we set all of that up. So just that concept and just that approach alone affected, all of the different pieces of production, really, and post-production. So those things wind up in the budget. It's a very long way around for me to say what I'm trying to say is once you discuss the approach, the budget is what comes out of that. So then we know, okay, how many people are we interviewing? How many days in the studio do we need? That translates to how many days do we need to rent that green screen? How many days do we need to, feed all those people? I'm sure you get the concept of what a budget is and what it does. But what I recommend is that you build it. You have a document that is a living, breathing document, a spreadsheet. I use a program called Showbiz Budgeting that I like. But there are so many different programs that you can use. And you can even just use your own Google spreadsheet or Excel spreadsheet that you make. But just categorize the different portions of production and try to estimate what those costs are going to be based on the approach that you've discussed. That's the best way to start with a budget, is to say, what do we want to do? And what will that cost realistically? There's another way to go about budgeting, which is a reverse engineering. Whereas you say, we want to make a film, we want it to be about this, we have this much to spend, or we have an investor that's willing to give this much. How do we do that? How do we take this amount of money and make the approach, the creative approach, happen that we want to happen? The way we budget, honestly, is kind of a combination of the two. We usually start with the overall approach and, sky's the limit. What do we need to make that happen? And then we start trying to raise that money. And then we see, did we get enough? Do we need to make any changes? Do we have to reverse engineer and say, well, we had hoped to have this much for special effects, but instead we have this much. You know what? I think we can make this happen with that amount. So that's how I'd like for you to think about budgeting, is that you want to be realistic, but you also have to be flexible. So again, there's that flexibility. The other thing you're going to have to understand about the budget, and we're going to talk about this more as we move forward, is that it really, it's an organic thing. It changes as you go. We're going to be talking to Alexander in a little bit. The other day, he talked about in his masterclass about structure and writing and how things can change in a film. Those creative changes translate to budget changes, scheduling changes, everything's connected. So let's talk about the next tool that not everyone is aware of or uses, but it's very, very important. And it's called the financial plan. So the financial plan is a map of where your money is going to come from. So when you say the film is going to cost this much money, you put together a financial plan so that you can show people that you want to partner with or sell to or invest in your film, where you think that money is going to come from. You'll start with your budget document, and you're going to have a bottom line for how much your film is going to cost. Now, the financial plan is going to have that same bottom line, but instead of adding up all the little different things that contribute to the total cost, you're going to add up we're going to apply for a grant, and the grant has $50,000 available. So $50,000 of our budget we anticipate is going to come from this grant. Or we have a private equity investor who's going to put in $100,000. And so we anticipate that $100,000 of our budget is going to come from that. So you map out that financial plan. That's important for people to understand if they're going to invest in your film, or if they want to do, some type of co-production. It's important for people to think and to know that you've thought about how this is going to happen. A lot of times, new filmmakers will go out and say, oh, my budget is $1 million and we're going to get a grant from Sundance. Well, Sundance doesn't give $1 million grant, and a lot of people are applying for the grants that they do have. So investors want to know that you have a realistic game plan and how that's going to come together. So that's your map. Here's the next step, the waterfall. The waterfall, even though this is a document that you put together at the very start of the production, this is something you're not going to really put in play until the end, because what the waterfall document is the way that it's the map really of how the money comes back to the investors and the participants and the producers. So anyone who puts money in can see through sales how that money's coming back to them. It's really the order. So it's called a waterfall because you start at the top and then you pay the first level and then the next level and then the next level. So that's all part of the agreements that you put together. The best thing I can say about this waterfall, and I am nuts about this document. I mean, I build this spreadsheet and I play with it and I play with it and I play with it because it's the way that I can understand what we need to sell the film for in order to recoup our investments and in order to make recoupments for our partners and our investors. The way that investors usually work is that they will give you a sum of money, and they're going to want to recoup that back. But because they're taking a risk, they want to make a premium or make a profit on that as well. It's kind of like a loan at the bank, right? But the investor is taking a risk, believing in you, believing in your vision. They sure understand that they may not even recoup their money, but they'd like to recoup, and they would like to recoup with a premium. Usually that's 20%. The other thing about investors and the waterfall is that most typically when people give you money for your film, they're going to want to come in last. So they want to be what's called last in, first out, which is the least amount of risk, right? So last in means other people have invested first, and then I'm going to give some funding towards the tail end because I've already seen a little bit and I already trust and I already think that your film's probably going to go somewhere. So there's my last in investment. But you know what? I'm still giving you money and I want it out first. So out of the first sales, I want to be paid before anybody else. So while that sounds logical for that investor, what's important for you as a producer, as you're putting together that waterfall and as you're putting together those agreements, is not everybody can be last in, first out. Unless they're willing to work on what's called a corridor. So if you can talk to all of your investors and they are all grouped together in the first payout and all get a certain percentage of payouts in that first level of the waterfall, you can work those things out. But the point is that that document really shows you from the first gross sales, the next thing that comes off is the sales representative's percentage. That's something that's part of the negotiations later. Usually when you're starting on a film, you don't know exactly what that's going to be yet. You may not even have a sales rep yet when you're starting. We've seen anything from 7%, 10%, 15%, 12%, 20%. it varies. So when you build this document and you're putting in the numbers for my investors are putting in this much and they need to recoup this much, I'm investing this much with my company and I need to recoup this much. You put those numbers in there and you play with the gross sales number. And then you play with different percentages, right? So see what that would be if you take 10% off the top for your sales representative. Um, the next step is, of course, if you find a distributor and there is a sale, those distributors will have different types of expenses and your sales team will have different types of expenses. So all of those things come off the top prior to getting to that first out sales number, which is why this document, and I hope I'm not confusing you, it can be a lot of numbers that change. And the way I typically do it is to make the same column, but with different variables right next to each other. So I will see, in order to make all of those expense recoupments, in order to recoup the investors and for them to make their profits, for us to hit the bottom line of what we need to get into profit, I will know what that bottom line number is. I will also know what the break-even number is. And I will know where the we're in profit number is. And I will be playing with those different percentages so that when my sales teams come to me at the end and say, what's our number? What's our target? Because obviously everyone wants to, sell for $1 million, right? But that's not going to happen. So what is your target? And I've been able to talk to our sales teams before and say, we need to hit this. And then they know what they need to target for the sales. They know what ballpark they're in. So I know numbers are boring, but this particular document is so important to you. And the more time you spend understanding it at the beginning in development and really knowing, the conversations and the investments and who expects what and what's written in each deal, if you know how to play with that so that at the end, you have a really clear window of where you need to be in sales, you will feel so much better. Because when someone comes to you and says, we have an offer for, 300,000, and you think, oh, great, our film cost 300,000. It really didn't. You're not going to break even because you have those additional percentages, you have those additional expense recoupments, you have the premiums for the investors. So you need to hit a higher number than what your budget was to break even. All right. So now the fun part. The next step in development, which is really fun, and the tool that you use in order to raise the money. These are the pitch documents. And this is another area where the producer and director work together to really put together a good sales pitch, if you will. It's a combination of numbers and creative and sales. The pitch information usually includes some type of a creative deck, which has a treatment, an approach that the director or writer puts together, a synopsis, and that's something that you'll find you use again towards the end if you wind up in a film festival or need to submit for a grant, any of those things. That synopsis is really going to help explain briefly what your film is about. Another piece that you're going to put together for these pitch documents are all of your team bios. So all of the important players and what are their credits, what have they done before. And then the next pieces are very specific to the project as well. Who are the key participants? In our case, when we're doing a documentary, that means who is already involved maybe as an interview subject, or who are our targets? Who are the people or the experts that we plan to talk to in order to really explain this topic and bring it home. So you'll want to have a clear list of that so investors or our sales teams or distributors, broadcasters, they know what you have in mind. So it's kind of like a mood board, if you will, because you'll also want to include examples of what those visuals might look like. If you're lucky and you have a little bit of initial investment to spend, you can put together a sizzle reel that gives that feel. shows what you have in mind, what those interviews might look like, or what the camera work might look like, or what the studio shoot might look like. I talked about 7852 before when we did the interviews on green screen and then we composited. So in our deck, we showed a still shot of someone sitting in a chair in a green screen. Then we showed the background, and then we showed the two of them blended, just to explain how the compositing was going to work. So that's an example of the type of creative that you would want to include in your pitch deck and or sizzle reel to really kind of explain the idea. So throughout all of these different stages and moving into the different stages of production, again, there's going to be a lot of changes. I keep saying that because I want you to understand, once you've built those documents, they're still fluid. They're always a roadmap, but it's kind of like when you're using your GPS, right? Maybe there's a reason that you want to take a turn off and get on at a different place in the road. So that's what all of those maps are for as you start through your process. One of the things that I want to emphasize as a best practice is to really start with the best practices of organizational skills. So when something does change it across all of those documents at the same time so that you're not confused. When the budget changes, that means the financial plan changes, right? Because the bottom line has changed, and you either need to figure out how to get more money, or you're lucky because maybe you've carved something off and you need less. If you make a deal with a pre-sale or an investor, the financial plan changes, because then you can say, this isn't an idea anymore. We know for sure we're getting that 100,000, or that grant came in and we did get that 50,000. So you'll check on that financial plan which pieces are pieces that are secured, funding that's secured, and funding that you still need to get. If the financial plan changes, the waterfall probably changes too, right? Especially if it's an investment or if it's a co-production. Maybe there's a different type of percentage that comes out in a different place of the waterfall. But what I really hope that you understand is that any change affects all of those documents all the way through. And it's just really smart to make sure that you're on top of that, because trust me, once you get through making different types of revisions, it will get confusing and you'll think, which version is this? Just always make sure that it's up to date, and that will serve you well throughout the whole process. The same goes for spending. So once you've started to spend your budget, make sure you record that immediately in whatever accounting program that you use. You could use something as simple as a Google spreadsheet or an Excel spreadsheet, whatever type of accounting system that you use that just shows, what you paid, what budget line that should have been assigned to, how much it was, who paid for it, and keep receipts, because you're going to have that information down the line. The other thing that I recommend in terms of budgeting and accounting, if you have your budget and you've built it with a column that has, the budget estimate in one column, what I recommend is immediately creating a column next to that for the actuals. And you track in each budget line what's been spent. So if you spend something, you put it in your accounting program, and then you actualize it in your budget in the actuals column. That column is going to help you more than you know. We talk about change, we talk about flexibility. Being able to open that up and look and say, we've budgeted this much for transcripts, but we've only used this much, and we have to move this amount to another line because something happened. Or maybe we didn't have to go on that trip, so we have a little bit more of our travel money that we haven't spent yet, and we need more equipment for this new idea that we had. You can move it. So if your actuals are up to date, you're going to be able to make those decisions more quickly. You're going to be able to be more flexible. The other thing that I would say that is really important about this, because sometimes people wait. They get all their receipts and they're all in an envelope, and then they decide, we're going to just add it all in at the end. Sometimes you forget. If you've been doing it along the whole way, you're going to be happy because the budget, the actuals, will be a deliverable. Your distributor is going to say, I want to see what you did spend and where you spent it on this film. So you're going to have to do it anyway. You might as well do it day by day instead of waiting till the end and going, what is this pile of receipts, right? It's really going to help you track through the process. Another reason you might have to have that is, if you are lucky enough to work in an area that might have some type of tax incentives, that's a whole nother ball game that we could talk about another time, but you will have to show which particular expenses occurred that are relative to that incentive. So again, your actuals will have to specify that, and it's just really important to have. You'll be glad to have it. Okay, now the fun stuff. Someone has invested, you've raised your money, you're starting, you've got pre-production. You're going to take all of the maps that you just built and you're going to use them for scheduling the life of the project. And the way you do that is you typically look at where you are, where you're starting. Maybe the subject you're covering has a specific schedule that you need to hit. Maybe it's an event that only happens once a year. So you'll know when you have to be in production. But if it's a concept that's evergreen that you could tackle at any time, one of the things that you'll want to do is start at the end. Decide what your premiere target is and work back. So say your target is BIFAN. You want to be in the festival. You have to look at what the submission deadlines are, and you have to make sure that you're ready to go by that time so that you can send it out. The way you build a schedule, when you start at the end, know this is where I have to be. Okay, how much time do I need to build that? Okay, how much time does the sound mix have to happen? Okay, that means edit right before that. Okay, right before that, we have to have the cuts. Okay, then there's production. So you just keep moving backwards. And once you understand that schedule and what your needs are, you can really talk to your creative team. You can talk about hiring those creative team members, your editors, your composers, your cinematographers. If you don't have a partner like we do, because we know Robert will do it. Your art director, if you're going to have to build a set, all of those different pieces. And what's really important to understand is that each stage affects the next stage, right? So when you're looking at that schedule and you know what the deadline is that you have to hit, and you know how many days you have allocated in the budget for each section, you just make sure that those happen in the right sequence. You make sure that they overlap in a way that is efficient for the participants. And I wholeheartedly recommend, once you have this team in place and you have a general idea of, okay, the sound mix needs to happen in July, pulling together all of those different team leaders. So pull in the composer and the sound mixer and the editor with the director and yourself and the post-production supervisor. Pull that team in and have one meeting to really talk about, oh, this is what I need. This is the technical way that we're going to work. These are the files that I want to have happen. And there are different ways that people like to work. For example, sometimes an editor likes to work with temp track music. Sometimes they'll cut to the scene and put that temp track in. Sometimes an editor doesn't want to do that. They want to just edit the content and then have a composer compose cleanly. So it's important to have that discussion so that the work is happening in the right order and efficiently. The other thing that starts to happen in pre-production is all of the logistic and business side of the production. So if there are any location issues or scouting or permits or travel, this is the time that starts to happen and occur. The other thing, and this is another one of those documents that I'm going to wave my hands and say really important to have, and that you're going to start using throughout, is make sure you have all your releases set up. You're going to want your location releases, your appearance releases, materials releases for your archival, etc. So once you've had a lawyer, help draft those up, or if you have one already, you're going to want to make sure that those are all built and set for that particular film. The right title, the right description, any specifics to that project need to be on that release. Build them, put them in a file, and then start to use them regularly and record them, put them in a specific place. I'm going to say more about that too, because you'll be really happy if you do it. Production. If all of the roadmaps are in place, you're going to be in good shape for plan A until plan A isn't plan A anymore. So you really just have to be flexible. As much planning as you've done, you might have travel, the crew is starting, you're arriving, you're picking up local rentals, all of these things, anything can change. I know I keep saying that, but I want you to understand that anything can change, and you have to be flexible. You have to think about, if we don't get to this today, what else could we do? Or, goodness forbid, if there's an accident, where's the closest hotel? Or hospital. No one wants to go to a hotel when there's been an accident. But where you have to think those things through. We plan to eat lunch here, but if they don't accept credit cards, where do we go? Always have that plan B. I'll give you two examples of this. I remember, I live on the East Coast in the US, and I flew all the way out to Los Angeles for a very important shoot. And I landed at the airport, was getting my bags, about to be picked up to go prep for the shoot the next day, and got a phone call that said, "Oh, hi, we have to move tomorrow. We're going to move it to next week." And I thought, great. Do I stay here? Do I fly back? Do we film somebody else tomorrow? Who can we move in? But because we've thought of those things, we were able to figure out the next steps. We said, you know what, we've been wanting to get a meeting with so-and-so. Let's see if we can move that up. And so we did that instead. Those types of things are helpful. We had another example recently when an actor had a health issue and was unable to join the shoot the next day. So we had to be creative. How are we going to use the time and the crew that we already had booked? And what are we going to do to solve this for the future? So, don't melt into a puddle. When those things happen, just think, look at your list. What else is on our list? What can we do to make this work? And I promise you will. Besides that, with production, and there's so much more to it, I'm going to kind of skip over it and just talk about a couple of best practices. Two things that I really want you to remember after the whole everything changes, be flexible, is make sure that you're thinking about the footage that is being recorded and making sure you have enough drives so that you clone the footage. We are so protective of our footage. We separate it even on different flights. We will have multiple drives, and Alexander will take one, Robert will take one, we'll ship one. We make sure that we have clones, so if anything happens at all, there's always that plan B with the footage as well. So make sure you've thought about cloning your drives after every production, who's responsible for that and where it's going. The other thing that I will say is really important to the rest of the process is transcripts. You're going to want to make sure that after each interview, you really have those transcripts obtained. And the reason for that is, with our process, as soon as you have that interview and you get that transcript, Alexander will read it and he'll make his selects and he'll say, oh, this is interesting. Or, hey, I hadn't thought about this before. Maybe this is a new thread we should explore. That goes back to, okay, maybe the budget's going to change, or maybe we have to pull something out of a different line because now we have a new idea. Or, hey, now we want to interview so-and-so and they don't live in Los Angeles or New York, they live in London. So we're going to have to figure out how to interview that person. So those transcripts help, identify the story structure, the different threads that come out. Documentary filmmaking is incredibly organic, even though we have a very clear idea of the premise and the questions that Alexander wants to answer. There are always things that change. So transcripts help with that, and they help lead us into the next stage, which is the paper cut, writing the script. So Alexander will take the transcripts and his selects and put together a paper cut. And this becomes the map for the editor, right? It's part of the assembly and the rough cut that is born out of this paper cut. What happens next from that step is really where the archival producing comes into play, because once there is a paper cut and a rough cut that's being put together, we start to have a much better idea of the support materials that we need to find, secure, acquire, license, release, whatever it is. So the archival producer, or in our case, what we do as a team is to really find those materials and put together a good sourcing log that talks about where those materials exist, what the title is, what the copyright information is. Always take a screen grab as you're searching and put that in your file. You may or may not use that, but then you'll be able to find the information about that piece again. And that's really something that you will find beneficial as we get down to the next level of roadmaps and deliverables. Because one of the things that happens is really understanding what your usage is. And you're going to be required to get something called errors and omissions insurance, or E&O. Distributors will require it. It's going to be something that you have to put into your budget document and understand what the costs of that are. And lawyers are supposed to review your clip log, and your clip log is a logged line by line representation of your edit. So it's going to include a description of what that shot is, where it starts, where it ends, is that footage that's original that you filmed? Is that something that you've licensed? Is that a still photograph that you've released? You have to line by line do that for your film. And that is a clip log that comes into play for your E&O insurance, and it's a deliverable. The distributors are going to want it. Let me tell you, the first time we discovered that on our first film, we were like, what? We have to build a whole log, and it was a process. Now we know to gather all of that information. And once we get out of the rough cut stage, once we get into that fine cut, it's feeling good, it's almost finished, we start building that log out, which again becomes a deliverable. But it's really that fine stage point in which you have to start putting that together. I'm just advocating for you being organized, gathering the material so you have it. So it's easy to reference and build that document once you get there. Another one of those documents is going to be the cue sheet that your composer is going to put together, which is similar. It's just a representation of where all the music cues show up and what those rights are, if they're original, if there are licenses, that type of thing. So that's another technical document that we'll talk about. Okay, now that the film is in fine cut and you're starting to get it out there, and maybe you have a premiere set up and you're all excited, the next step is to talk about PR. And if you are lucky and you can, and I highly recommend it, some of the best dollars ever spent on a film is to make sure you budget for a PR team for your premiere. So that team will help put your film in front of the right people that can review your film. And by right, I mean people that, understand that kind of film, people that might respond to it, people whose audience, if they write about your film, will be interested in seeing it. And so there's a whole lot of science that goes into that, and the PR team can really guide you. But the PR, what you can do to help support that process is to go all the way back to the beginning with your pitch documents and you start to create something that's a press kit. A lot of that same information from the pitch documents goes into your press kit. So you will have your synopsis, a log line, your team bios. I mean, sound familiar? It's a lot of the same stuff. The list of participants. So it's no longer your wish list, but the people that actually were interviewed. You might have some images that you can share. And that's something that they will want as deliverables as well. You're going to have to deliver a certain amount of stills for the distributor once you get there. And there's a number of different ways you can accomplish that, but just don't be surprised when they ask for those stills. Those pieces of the press kit almost mirror the beginning with the pitch document. So it's just important to understand again that the work that's done up front pays off at the end, because when you're stressed and you're trying to get this film out and you've got deliverables, but all you have to do is go back and reference this initial document and maybe shift it a little bit, you'll be happy. So know where that stuff is, keep it updated as you go. You won't have to include the budget information, which did have to be included in the pitch, right? But at this stage, they just want to know what it's about. They want to know what they can talk about with press. Okay, I'm trying to move ahead here because I know I'd like to get to Alexander. Once you get through PR and you've had your premiere and you have your sales, I touched on this a little at the beginning. When you have a sales offer, there are a number of things that you have to consider. And this is important. It goes back to the beginning, to your financial plan and to your waterfall. So the territory, how the payment comes in, what the payment is, and what the terms of the sales agreement or the distribution agreement will be. You have to remember any of the specifics of the agreements that you made at the start, the co-production, any carve outs. So say, for example, you decide to pre-sell to a specific market. You can't do a worldwide deal unless that market is willing to have a buyout of some kind. An example of this, what if you did a pre-sale with Canada for $20,000? And you have to tell distributors, well, we've already given Canada away. So you can buy North America, but not Canada. That's a carve out. There might be certain holdbacks in different agreements, because once you've started to break up your deals, if you no longer do just like a worldwide deal, and you might have different holdbacks that you have to consider. So we promised this group that they could have the premiere, or the biggest sale has to happen first. So even though you came in as a pre-sale of a territory, you're going to have to wait for the bigger market to do their premiere first and then hold back to do yours. These are all terms that you're going to have to remember and understand, because they're agreements that you made as the producer at the very, very beginning of the film. Again, as the payment offer comes in, I already talked about this a little bit. You have to know what your target is. You have to understand what you need to recoup. You have to remember those percentages that come off of the top of the sale. And you have to understand the payment schedule that the distributor is offering, so you know how that works for your waterfall. You may not get the full sale in one piece. You might get, well, it's actually pretty common. You'll get what's called a minimum guarantee, and then another payment upon delivery, and then another final payment upon what they call acceptance of delivery. So you have to understand how those terms work, what those schedules mean, and how that recoupment comes back to your waterfall. Again, just the more you know about that at the front, the easier it will be to digest this at the end. There are a lot of things to talk about in terms of contracts and negotiations, and we'd need another masterclass to go through those. So all I will say about that is hopefully you can invest in an attorney to review those agreements with you. I highly recommend it. We've made many, many mistakes, learned many, many things through the years. But the one lesson I really want to impart to you today is, you know what you need. You have that gut feeling on whether or not it's a good deal for you. Do not feel pressure. Never feel pressure. Be prepared to walk away. Be prepared to say, well, this is the only offer we've received. It's not great. It doesn't get us out of the hole. We're going to walk away. There'll be something better in the future. So that's the one thing I really want to advise and impart. Just believe in your film, believe in what you have, know what you need, and don't feel that you have to accept something. It's just that's something I'd really want to impart. So delivery, I'm wrapping this up, I promise. See, there's a lot to it, what the producer does. Delivery. When you're delivering, there are two kinds of delivery that happen. There's the technical delivery, which is all of the files and the film itself, all of the different things. Is it a DCP? Is it encrypted or not? Are there subtitles or captioning? What are the different aspect ratios of the broadcast version versus the film version, or are they the same? Different levels for the audio and visuals. There are all of those different things that have to be calculated, and you work very directly with your post team with a list of specs that is provided to you. And that's how you meet those technical deliverables. With the technical deliverables are the legal deliverables or the paper deliverables. And this is where you will pat yourself on the back, big celebration, if you've been organized this entire time. You will have to establish what is called the chain of title. It's a fancy legal way of saying who owns this material. And that's what all of the paper deliverables are. So you'll have to start with, whose idea was this? Who owns this idea? Who are the people that were hired, and what are their agreements, and who owns their work? So all of those agreements that you put together with the crew at the very beginning, those are agreements that show chain of title, that as this production company, you have secured the rights to everybody's work. You're going to use those documents, all of those agreements that you've made, to create the crediting systems. You're going to have, again, these are documents I start on day one, not the end. I don't wait and say, who's worked on this film? Anytime someone's been hired, they're already in my credits. I have them. Anytime somebody does something helpful as a thank you, they're in our credits. We have a living, breathing document. We add names as we go. If you continue to do that, your billing block, your credits, there's also a document called a credit statement, which very much like the log or the cue sheet or the waterfall is a map for you. Anytime you make an agreement with somebody about their credit, you build a document or a log, a spreadsheet that says, this is Kerry Deignan Roy. Her agreement is dated such and such a date. The credit she gets on this film is the producer in first position. And this is the wording from the agreement. So you build those documents, which have to be delivered, but it's more so than just a list of people in the credits. There is a backup, a legal backup for that you can build every time you hire someone and you put their credit into that form. Again, just best practices. I think, we've gone through almost everything that I think we should go through. So I think maybe what we should do at this point is bring in Alexander and get his perspective on the, hey there.
Hello.
Are you still awake? What I'd like to do is start, Alexander. I've got a definition. There's a producer that I respect. Her name is Rebecca Green, and she has a web page and a blog and a support system, if you will, for producers called Dear Producer. And I think that her definition is great. So I'd love to hear what you think about this. She says, Producers do not exist to simply fulfill the director's bidding. A good director understands that a good producer makes the movie better, and subsequently, this relationship becomes valuable to them. The director-producer relationship is a creative partnership. If the director is leading the creative vision, the producer is there to guide, support, manage, protect, and ultimately create that vision. Isn't that a nice, I like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really that's a really well put, definition. And I think, yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, I think it goes back to, what we were talking about the other day, during my masterclass, this sort of the importance of the relationship between the director and the producer, and going back to also what I was saying, that how important it is for young filmmakers, beginning filmmakers, or filmmakers who may have just only made one film or maybe two films, to think in terms of, is there somebody, and not just a producer, but a team, are there people that I want to work with long term? And I think, if that's something that you want to do and you want to have longevity in this business, I mean, it goes without saying that you want to surround yourself with people that you can work with, people who challenge you, who push you. And it's not easy. I mean, that's the thing, is it's never easy. I mean, obviously we're like brother and sister, but like brother and sister, it's not easy, right? There's always fights, there's always disagreements. But at the end of the day, the films, I think we're equally proud. We both put our names on those films, so we want to be proud to put our names on those films. And so obviously there's going to be push and pull, and I think the relationship on that level between a director and a producer is, I mean, I think that's part of that definition that you said. I think you're here to also push, and sometimes if you feel like it's going in a quote unquote wrong direction, or something is not working or whatever, then obviously you're not here to say yes. You're here to raise your hand and say, look, I don't think this is going to work, and this is why. And then we start opening and having those discussions, and ultimately that push and pull is for the best. It makes the films better.
It's funny, I was thinking about this last night, because I think a great example of that is the way we noodled that new log line back and forth last night.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
and it's great, and the way that our process, I think, works really well. You'll say, how about this? I'll say, I like this part a lot. I'm questioning this part. And you'll say, well, what is it about that part? And so you'll call me back out on that, so that I'm not just saying no to this, but this is why and this is what I'd like. And oh, that makes sense. And then you go back and how about this? And I think it's that give and take that just makes it stronger. And I've been in other situations on other films where, there isn't that same level of respect, where it's just like, no, this is what it's going to be. I don't care what you think. And I think that's one of the things that we've developed over the years, where even if you decide, you know what, no, I do feel really strongly, I prefer it this way, that's okay, because we've had that discussion. And
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. And I think it really sort of, at the end of the day, is whenever that happens, at least it's the push that you're giving me, or the dissenting opinion, as it were, whatever. It either, I mean, it sort of pushes me to do two things. One, you're showing me a way to make this one thing, whatever it is, better. Or you are in some way making me think about, okay, what was it about this creative choice that worked for me? And maybe I didn't quite have that clarity, but then, having you pushing against it makes me realize, I get this, but it strengthens my belief into why I want to do it this way. And then I can actually articulate it in a better way.
right.
And so either way, as a director, I win, because anytime you push against me, right, it either, either I change that thing and it makes it better, or it strengthens my belief in well, it's not so much about strengthening the belief, but it's about providing added clarity about my intent
Right.
in what I'm trying to do. And so either way, it makes the film better, and it prepares me better also as a director when I'm in front of the BIFAN audiences, for instance, and they're asking me questions, to be able to say, well, this is why it was done in this
You do
way.
say that a lot. You'll say, okay, now I know how to answer that question. Q&A. Well, you know what I think is interesting is, I just spent all this time rattling through all this, boring business, spreadsheets, contracts, scheduling, all of those things. But the minute we start talking about how we work together, a lot of it is the feedback and the creative input. And so I want to make sure that the students watching this understand that as well. And I think that's one of the reasons why the definition of a producer is so difficult, because when you Google it and it says administrative and financial, I mean, what we need to call all the definition writers at all the at all the dictionaries, because it's really hard to categorize everything that producers do.
Well, and also, and I think this, I mean, it still happens to us, but it happened to us probably a lot more in the early days, like somebody helps you out on this one little thing, and then they immediately want a producer credit or a co-producer credit in return. And I think that's going to happen to every single one of you listening to this masterclass. And you can't just freely give producing credits. It's just not the way it works. And I think it also diminishes the role of the producer. So I think it's all those definitions, I mean, especially any films where you see like 10 credits as associate producer, you have to wonder, how much did those associate producers really do? So it's something to be careful about, I think.
Well, and they may have, as far as people that are contributing to
Sure.
a portion of the film, an associate producer is probably a pretty relevant credit, because maybe they took on one project or supported in some way. It's just once you get to those, producer or co-producer credits, like no one asks for an archival producer credit, because unless they're knowing that they're doing that, they just start right at the top. And I think part of that is just understanding what those what they all are. So hopefully I gave some insight to that. It's
Absolutely. And what, one thing I should also say, that I think is really important, especially sort of in today's climate, that we've learned the hard way, and that I would want to sort of add to all the wisdom you've provided in terms of producing, is the idea of the value of a film, of knowing the value of a film. Because especially when you're starting off and you have a first feature, and obviously every filmmaker out there, their dream is to get their film seen, right? They want to get into festivals, they want to get distributed, they want people to love it. I mean, we do what we do because we want people to love what we do, right? I mean, to a certain extent, it's about communication, right? Mm-hmm. But I think the danger is that immediately now, if you've got something good, you're going to have sales agents and you're going to have distributors circling around your project like sharks. And their goal is to get your film for the minimum amount of money possible, so that they can make as much money as they can off of your back. And I think, we have to be careful. And I think that's really, now I'm speaking to the filmmaking community as a whole. We have to be very careful to understand the value of what we do. I mean, you were mentioning, of course, there are investors, there are people who put in money into projects. Well, we put in a lot of sweat equity. We put in a lot of effort, a lot of creativity, a lot of really, really hard work into what we do. And that has value. And so, I think filmmakers out there have to be very careful who, when people approach them, do your research. If somebody approaches you and basically wants to get the rights to your film and there is no minimum guarantee, why in the world would you give them your film? You have to have a sense of what the value of your film is. And as Kerry said earlier, how much is it going to take? How much are you going to have to sell it for in order to break even? Because if you can't do that, then you're giving your film away. And yeah, sure, people who have been working years on a project and they want to get it seen, you're vulnerable, because when somebody comes to you and says, I want to show your film, and if it's the first person who's ever said that to you, you're almost like, oh, here, take my film, and that can be a huge mistake to make. So you have to be very careful. Don't take the first offers. Wait. I mean, in fact, we have taken risks sometimes. Oftentimes we take risks all the time. But I think, the biggest risk is to not pre-sale a film and wait until hopefully you have a big premiere. Mm-hmm. And you have to be also realistic about the kind of film you're making, and whether that film is potentially a Sundance fit, a Venice fit, a BIFAN fit. Where does it go? Where could it potentially premiere? And what is that festival going to do for you? Now, there are certain festivals that have huge, very powerful market. And so if you own the rights to your film, you hold on to it, and you get this big Sundance premiere, then all of a sudden now you're going to get a ton of interest. Now, if you don't get that big Sundance premiere, it's not the end of the world. There's other ways to sell your film, but you have to sort of weigh that. You have to think about those things. That's all part of the festival strategy, which would be a whole other masterclass, which maybe we'll do in 2022.
Yeah. Well, and that's the same. I feel that way about the contracts. I think that's one thing, and I regret that I just didn't have the time to get into the details of that today. But that is something that, I wish someone would have taken us aside at the beginning. That's something you don't usually learn in film school. So film school people out there, how to understand contracts and what those details mean. And even though you think you might have something written into that contract that is protecting you, the way it's written, like, for example, we had a line in a contract that was something about payment happens upon acceptance of delivery. If delivery is not accepted, a letter is sent and we, fix it. Okay, great. But then what? Then everything was out the window. So the minute a note comes back, there is no payment schedule anymore. And that's because it wasn't written specifically into the contract. So those types of things are important, and you don't know. And these contracts are many pages. So the first time you look at it, it's really daunting. And you know what? It should be. So I really advise, when you're putting together the budget, don't skimp on the legal side of it. Make sure that you go through, you can ask the questions, you think about, in the same way you think about those waterfall documents, this money's coming on this date and this is why. Make sure you understand the process of the contract and what's really coming to you and when. And the other thing, the last thing I'll impart on that, is the whole minimum guarantee, because we keep talking about that. The minimum guarantee is exactly what it sounds like. It is the minimum amount of money that is guaranteed to you. And it's usually an upfront payment when you make your deal. So that minimum guarantee is X amount of money. And it's important for you to know, when you make a sale, that is the only money you are guaranteed. So even though they still talk about all these other things that may happen, DVD releases, theatrical, 70% this, 20% that, 30% this, that we're going to split this, you need to look at that minimum guarantee as likely the only money you're going to see. Now, you might have a good relationship with some distributors that are able to do what they need to do on the back end. And we've had those experiences. We have some partners that we really, really respect and have done great things for us and have put us into profit on films on the back end. All I'm saying is you just can't count on that as an absolute that's going to happen. Really understand what that minimum guarantee means. And understand that there are other pieces in that contract that are usually working against you, so that the money continues to go somewhere else instead of to you after that point, like different types of expenses and how those things funnel through. And you just have to pay attention to that in the reporting. So again, another masterclass for another time, but it's so important. Yeah. I just want to make sure.
But also, I think, yeah, for sure. And I think it's also really important for people to understand that whatever first version of the contract you're going to get is the worst possible version that you're going to get for yourself. And the best possible version of the contract, of the deal, that they are going to get. So, you know, again, you should never sign a first contract. A first contract is a starting point. It's a starting point for negotiation. And again, if you understand the value of your film, if you understand, and also, by the way, talk to other filmmakers, right? If you have a sales agent, if you have a distributor who comes to you and gives you a contract because they want to distribute your film, well, first of all, do your research. Who are they? What have they done? What is their track record? And then find some of those filmmakers. Talk to them and say, hey, I see you've worked with so-and-so. What was it like? Are you happy with your relationship? And, you know, filmmakers, at least I feel like as a community of, you know, producers, directors, writers, you know, especially in the genre community, we're so tight, you know, we will be honest with each other, right? And that's the thing. And so at the end of the day, I think the good people, and I've always thought it's a stupid move for a distributor or a sales agent to try and rip you off, because if you want to work with someone who has longevity as, you know, as a filmmaking team, why would you rip them off? You know, like right now, we're working with people over and over and over again because those people have been good to us. They do good work. They've done a great job distributing our films. And we know that we get the reports from them and they're just transparent. And that's how you build relationships. So don't be afraid to question. Don't be afraid to look at the contract to say, okay, they want X amount in expenses, right? Is that standard? Is that industry standard? Ask other producer, call your friends, call whoever you have in your network, and don't be afraid to ask simple questions and say, you know, I don't know, is this a decent deal? And that's how you get better. I mean, it took us, you know, at least a decade to figure things out, and we're still, you know, people still try to trick us.
Yeah. Well, and I think that goes across, I think that's a good way to probably wrap this up too, is that, you know, even every day we learn, whether it's about distribution, whether it's about production, whether it's about how to build a waterfall, every day we continue to learn. And I think that's, I wouldn't want it any other way. I think it would be really dull if we weren't continually growing and learning. And so I think that's part of the process of filmmaking. I think that's part of the process of how we work together. I think that's why we've been working together for such a long time. So again,
will for many years to come.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, I guess we can wrap it up. Thanks for, yeah, we wish we were with you in person, of course, and we hope we helped in some small way today.